What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Representing the Resin. My name is Jameson, Welbourn, and today we're joined by Matt of House of the Great Gardener and Great Gardener Farms. Matt, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Awesome.
Absolutely. So where are you joining us from today?
I am in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, just outside of Duncan.
Beautiful. So, Matt, you've been in the Canadian cannabis space and the global cannabis space for decades. You're definitely one of the OGs up here. There's a whole lot that I want to go into and unpack, but to stay true to the format of the show, let's take it back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about where you're from and where you grew up.
I come from a little tiny town in Ontario called Mount Forest. Everybody calls it MoFo for short. And the town motto as you drive into town on top of the water tower was high, healthy, and happy. And beautiful little Mount Forest had maybe 2,500 people to the town, one stoplight, no commercial, anything. We didn't have commercial, nothing. And I grew up there. Then I moved away. Then I moved away to the city. Oh, yeah, sure.
What did your parents do? Like, what found you there?
So most of my family comes from like the Windsor. It's half my family lives on Windsor, half it lives over on Detroit. My dad worked at the Bank of Montreal, and he ended up getting transferred to this small little town. I think my parents wanted to get the family out of the city and move to a small town and raise their kids in a small town. Mount Forest was the. I remember when we first moved there and we went to the Catholic school, and the basketball court at the Catholic school was on grass. I remember looking at my mom going like, "Where have you moved us to?" And then so she let us go to the public school because the outdoor public school basketball court actually was on asphalt. So that was like the deciding factor for us. Like, okay, you could go to that school.
That's amazing. So
like full on like Mennonite like inclusion. Like you go to the grocery store and there's a spot to tie up your horse, and I mean it's like old school for sure back then too.
So what was like growing up, what were you into? Were you big into sports, or were you kind of always in the counterculture? What were you like as a kid?
I was big into sports. I was on every sports team up until about grade 10, and then my skateboard took over, and I just became a skater kid. Right into college, and we just, as soon as you got 16, you drive to Toronto looking for skate spots, drive from city to city looking for all the cool little skate spots, and then you get to high school, and for us, the high school was like a couple towns over. So then all of a sudden, all the kids from all the small towns around sort of went to the high school, and you got a little skater gang, and little skater punks listening to Green Day and Pennywise, and
Absolutely, man. So what about where was cannabis during this point? Like, at what point in your childhood or adolescence did you become aware of the plant? Like, was it at a young age, or did it take some time?
Oh, I mean, for us in Ontario, it was all weed, but because we were so close to Montreal and so much hash and hash oil sort of comes out of Montreal, and hash oil from the bikers, and that was, I don't know, grade 7, 8. So you're what, 13, 14, 15. But it wasn't really a big thing, right? Doing BTs, doing bottle tokes.
Oh, for sure. Right? Was it a memorable first time?
Who was the best at sort of like splitting the hash and the tobacco smoke and getting it in the bottle perfect, and doing all those stuff all through high school. I mean, we had a lot of acid in high school. We had shrooms and weed. I mean, those are about the things that we had in high school. And then
What was your relationship with weed like initially? Like, what was that first experience like? Was it immediately drawn to it, or did it take some time to develop that relationship?
no, yeah, sure, yeah. That relationship, that is, I would sort of say today, didn't start until I was in college. And it was
So,
even after, I went to college, right out of high school. I went to college for chemical engineering, and I was in that program for about 2.5 years. Then I ended up getting a job at Labatt's as a sales rep kid, like 20 years old, living the life as a like in the Toronto area. I could get in any bar, any it was just the party life while working at Labatt's and stuff. And I sort of walked away from my chemical engineering diploma. I was only like a few credits short. And I was just like, by then it was like, what job am I going to get? I'm going to be working in the oil fields. I'm going to be working for these petrochemical companies as a lab tech. Like, what am I going to do? It was funny enough. There was a guy in my class that he's always like stealing the hexane and stealing the pentane, and he's always making these crazy weed cookies and stuff back then. And that guy, I always wonder where that guy is now, because he was a pretty ingenious guy, stealing stuff out of the chemistry lab. Like, what are you doing with that? He made these cookies one time that I just got so high I just had to go home. I can't go to class like this.
so that must have strained relationships with your parents there, stepping away, being not close to a degree and stepping away for a job in beverage.
Yes, sort of. They saw it always as a sort of career, right? That generation comes from,
Yeah.
my dad. My dad had a couple minor jobs, but worked for the bank for his whole life and did the retirement thing.
Yeah.
So for them, it was like, wow, the Bats is a good company, and get a good job in there, and you can have a great career there, right? I mean, it wasn't. Maybe a little disappointed. So what can you do, right?
So where was cannabis at this point? Like, had it kind of taken a back seat? I know during my university years, there were some other things that maybe I was more focused on at certain points, but was it always, was it present? Were you cultivating at that point? Like, what was your relationship with cannabis like in university? And
No, no. Maybe my second year of chemical engineering, I planted a seed out by the railroad yard, and I sort of took care of it all summer, and it grew maybe 3 feet tall with maybe 5 internodes, and fell over, and I dried it all and smoked it. That was about it. I think I took a bunch of Christmas lights once and put it in a closet, and sort of plugged it in and out whenever I thought the plant needed some light. And same thing, grew a plant with like 3 nodes that was 3 feet tall type thing. But it was pretty minor. But an event that did happen to me at the chemical engineering at Sheridan College in Brampton was that I took this class, and it wasn't by purpose. It was a total by accident. I didn't sign up for the electives, and I thought I could just show up to whatever elective I wanted, and I showed up to the computer class, and it was full. And they were like, you have to go take this other elective. And then I went, and they're like, there's only one left, and it's called mysticism. And I'm like, what's that? Like, I had no idea. This farm kid from a small town, right? I had no idea what mysticism was. But that was the only elective left, and that was my class. And during that class, we got into Carlos Castaneda, and we got into G.I. Gurdjieff, two books, especially Castaneda. That sort of started reading those books were probably the beginning of, say, not necessarily my cannabis journey, but just my overall journey into what will become my journey of intention, we'll call it. So then I worked at Labatt's for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then I lost my job at Labatt's. and that was in Brampton, and my brother was living in London, Ontario, and he was going to Fanshawe College, and he was like, "Hey, come on down." So then I moved to London, Ontario, and that's really where my cannabis career started.
Talk to me about that. You know, what did that look like? Like at that time, were you getting named bud, or were you getting just nameless? Like, what was your memory at that time of what you had access to?
We're getting named weed. I mean, this is probably 90. This will be like 94, 95. We're getting named weed. I would say no. We were just getting weed.
Yeah.
Because I was really that guy to all my friends that ultimately would have the mason jar box with 12 different kinds in it, and asking my friends, what kind would you like to smoke? And they're like, what are you talking about? Right? It's just weed. I just want to smoke some weed. And I'm like, no, like, you want to feel this way, you want to feel that way. Like I was that guy to most of the people I know. So
So how did that journey start for you in London when you moved in with your brother?
I moved in with my brother. My brother by that time wasn't living in London anymore, but there was like the crew, right? So I sort of went and started hanging out with the crew and started partying, and the other thing that sort of happened at when I was at Brampton at the chemical engineering program is after my second year, I got a job as a camp counselor at the local campground, and I did camping trips with kids and stuff. But anyways, the camp counselors took me to my first rave, which was like it was like Destiny 15 or something. It was the first World Electronic Music Festival at the Mossport International Raceway. If anyone out there knows, it's the one where the tornado showed up on Friday. And if you weren't there on Friday for all the tornado, you weren't there. Anyway, so that was my first rave, and I was hooked after that. I spent the rest of the 90s on dance floors in Toronto and everywhere. I grew weed. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was a raver. So I was in London hanging out with all these party kids, just partying and having a great old time. And my brother's roommate at the time was like, "Hey, you want to grow some weed?" And I was like, "What? Yeah, sure. Sounds great to me." I had no plans. I didn't have, I had a couple bucks to my name. I ended up applying for Ontario student loan. It's called OSAP, Ontario Student Application Program. And, the government gave me like 20 grand, and then I used that 20 grand and we built a grow room in a house in London. So that was our first grow. And that was like,
What that look like?
it was four giant, like 6-foot parabolic reflectors with like vertical bulbs. And we were using a deep water system. So we just had like 8-inch rubber buckets from like Home Depot, and you just drilled 3 holes in it and put a basket in it and a air bubbler in the bottom, and the sort of away we went. That was the way this guy was showing us. So it was like cool, and it was great, and we took our first harvest and we moved out to Bowen Island for the summer. We took that summer and lived on Bowen Island and just ate shrooms and had a great time. And then then I went back, and from there I started a business marketing program at Fanshawe College. So that was like my cover to growing weed. It's like, what do you do? I'm a student. So we lived this sort of student lifestyle, growing weed and going to parties. And
what were some of the first seeds you popped? Where did you get them?
So there was like in London, Ontario is like a huge hippie sort of Grateful Dead collective family community. We all used to just hang out in the park. And I remember getting clones from a couple of the guys in the park. And then we had, I mean, London, Ontario has a wealth of history, right? Chris Clay opened up Hemp Nation in London, and Chris Clay ended up was one of the cases in the Kay, Malmo, Levine, and Kane case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Chris Clay was selling clones out of his Hemp Nation store in London. So that sort of community had there were genetics sort of just floating around at the time, and like it was all Skunk One, Chemo, Purple Star, Black Domina. I ended up getting like a White Russian at one time. That was really popular.
How were you getting? Was your information from like people in your direct network, or were you active on the forums back then?
There were no forums back then.
What?
If there were forums back then, I didn't like. This was like the '90s. Like I didn't even. I still had like a beeper and a cell phone.
True.
I mean, even like sort of fast forward when I was living in on the West Coast. I mean, I still remember my roommate on Overgrow, and I was like, "What are you talking to people on the internet about weed? You're crazy." Right. So I mean, back in the '90s, I mean, you didn't. I mean, High Times magazine, and then we started going to Amsterdam. I think my roommate went in, I think 97, 96, 97. I ended up going 98, 90, maybe 97, 8, and then 99. And then I stopped going for like 9 years or 10 years before I went back. But that was what we did. We started, someone made up enough money went to Amsterdam. Like, all right, you got to get all these seeds and bring them back. And, and then that's how you did it back then. And we went to Amsterdam because you could talk directly to, Simon from Sirius, or Soma from Soma Seeds, or, Shanti Baba's just sitting right there. I can ask him a question, and those guys were the masters, and that's how you got it.
The first time,
like London, Ontario, like even like Mark Emery had his City Lights bookshop in London, Ontario, and at one like you weren't allowed to sell cannabis magazines or any. It was illegal to have any of that stuff back then, and those guys would sell it, and so that information sort of got out slowly. But yeah, I mean, we didn't have videos, we didn't have any of that stuff. It was like High Times magazines, and at that time in London we had Kyle Cushman. So Kyle Cushman was over in Detroit with the Detroit Danksters. And then after Chris Clay got busted, a guy named Pete, we called him NYPD, he ended up taking over Hemp Nation, and then he opened up what he called Organic Traveler. And Pete ended up becoming he's like one of the founding guys under Indiva, the edible company that's on the legal market. So all that was going on at that time, and I mean, it was a glorious time because everybody grew different, right? Nobody really knew what the best way was, or I was growing in deep water buckets, and a buddy they were doing the hardcore 2 lights on a 4x8 table, air cooled, just cramming 100 plants on a 4x8 table and just rocking out big just cola branches, and so we all were growing differently. That's what I really liked about it, is because everyone was like working on their own thing. And Kyle Cushman was around, and he used to come by and take pictures for High Times, and then we were doing the extreme bending and extreme training. And there's still the sort of 90s High Times magazines that have all these pictures from our gardens of these things that we were doing to plants. I ended up developing it was like a weight training program where we would hang this little wire with a nut on the bottom and bend the branch out and then put the nut on it because I was like, because everyone was just tying their branch down to their plant, right? I was like, wow, if you go to the gym and you want to work out your arm, you don't tie your arm down and just like you want to do this. So I developed these little weights and I'd go in my room because I was coming home from parties. So I had hours and hours to just, hang out with my plants, and I'd move all these weights around every single night because the next day you come down and it would be up, and then you move the weight over, and then you move the weight over, and then you can and then you go back to the beginning and you put on a bigger weight and you work that weight out, and then you get on a bigger weight, and then by the time you get to like week 3 and 4, you can take those weights off. And you had these giant arms that would just stay there, right? And I mean, it took so much work, but just great times. Great times we had.
Oh, cool, man. What were those first trips to Amsterdam like for you?
Oh, the best. I mean, right? Because there was nowhere you could smoke weed. There wasn't like it's like now you go to Amsterdam, it's like, yeah, cool, I could buy weed here. I could buy weed in the store. Like you would walk into a store and you'd be like, I could buy weed. I could just buy weed. You're just gonna sell me weed. Right? And you're just gonna let me smoke this so I can just walk around the streets and just smoke this weed and nobody cares. Right? I mean, it was amazing. I still remember. Because it was a White Russian. I ordered this White Russian. Our hotel room wasn't ready till like 4. It was like 1 o'clock or something like that. We still had our luggage. I can't remember the club though, but I remember smoking it. And I remember getting so high that we just went back to the hotel and sat in the lobby, so high. I was like, I'm buying these seeds. As soon as I get a hold of these seeds, I'm buying them. I still remember sitting on the curb outside in the street, just like, holy fuck, I bought this weed at the store. It was great. They were great times. I loved Amsterdam. Was the best for me back then. It was, I mean, and then you had a place that had everybody just hanging, like the Pax Party House that the High Times Cup was was right beside the police station. Like you show up at the front door and all the cop cars are parked up and down the street. You're like, what the fuck, man? I'm not going in here. Like, no, that's just the police station next door. They don't care. Right? So I mean, those are great times.
Who were some of the individuals that you connected with first? Like, was it Swami, or who was it that you were going out to see or first made that connection with?
I mean, the first couple years I was there, it was just total innocence, right? I didn't really know anybody. You're like, oh, and you would go just to sit in the lectures, right? Oh, Simon from Serious Seeds is going to talk. Oh, Felix from Switzerland. Oh, that guy's cool. That guy's cool. Soma's going to talk. And I have all these videos. We just sent them to London Drugs because I have them on what do they call that? Video 8, the old fucking cassette tapes and the video machines. We just sent them to London Drugs to get them all converted to digital, right? Because they're like, I mean, I have Breeder Steve, I have Ariane, I have Simon, I have Kyle Cushman, and I have just lists and lists of guys, and going and listening to them talk. So the first couple of years was just pure innocence. I am a total tourist. I'm taking the little booklet that you used to get, and you go to like every coffee shop and get the stamp in every book, because at the end of the High Times Cup, you get a T-shirt if you got. I smoked them all at the High Times Cup, and that was my mission, man. I would show up and be like, oh, I'm smoking them all this year, right? And then the third year, was the year that I took all my pictures of my weight training program, and I wanted to show my weight training program off. And this day was was one of those magical days, because I woke up and I told everybody I want to be there early. I want to be there before the lineup at the PAX Party House starts, because I want to get in there early to go see Soma and show him my pictures. So everyone's dog fucking around, and we're late, and we show up and the fucking lineup's already around the third corner of the building, and I'm like, oh my god, we're never gonna get in this place. And the cab pulls up right out front, and as I get out of the car, the guy at the front door just opens the door, and I didn't hesitate. I said, oh, thanks a lot, man. And I just walked right in the front door, and my girlfriend and my buddy are in behind me, and we get through the door, and they're like, do you know that guy? I'm like, no. And he's like, why did he open the door? I'm like, I have no idea. And I go, but I wasn't hesitating, so I walked right in. And so all of a sudden I found myself in the PAX Party House, and it hadn't opened yet. So my girlfriend was like, I'm gonna go find a seat and get the perfect seat in the lobby where all the auditorium where all the lectures are. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go upstairs and talk to Soma. So I go upstairs, and Soma's just sitting there not doing anything. And I remember walking up to him, and I remember being like, excuse me, Mr. Soma, I was wondering if I could show you my pictures. And I start showing him these pictures of these plants that I've all splayed out and have all these weights all over them. And he's just like, who took these pictures? And I'm like, I did. Just my pictures. And he's like, what magazines have you been in? I'm like, no, just no magazines. He's like, well, who are you? Where did you come from? And I'm like, just a kid from Ontario. And he's like, this is fantastic. This is so amazing. He's like, you have to tell people about this. And he's like, do you think you can come up with something in like the next 15 or 20 minutes? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I'm running the lectures today, and I'm going to give you like a 15 or 20-minute spot up on the PAX Party House stage to tell everybody in this place about this cool weight training program. And I'm just like, what? Right? I'm still like, I mean, my innocence has now like been cracked, right? I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, yes, yeah, I could come up with something, right? So I go downstairs, my girlfriend's sitting there, and she's like, how did it go? Did you meet Soma? I'm like, yep, I met him. And I'm like getting out my notepad, and I'm like making notes. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I have the like 115 to 130 spot up on the stage. Soma's putting me up on it. He liked my pictures so much. She's just like, what? And I'm just like sweating bullets. I'm looking around, and the who's who of everyone is starting to come in the room and stuff. So anyways, that was my first.
How'd it go?
Oh, it went great. I mean, I had such a great time. I had all these people come up to me after. I had this crazy guy from New York come up to me, and he's like, you made growing weed. He made it make sense. He was like, I want you to come to New York. I want you to teach all my crews and all my guys. He gives me this card, and on the card is like this metallic-y sort of, and on it just says the specialist, and it has a phone number. And I'm just like, who the hell are these people, right? I always wonder. He was like, girls, cars, houses, whatever you want, you can have it and stuff. And then to the point, he scared the crap out of me, right? But I always kept his card because it was like. And then from that, that sort of launched. I mean, Soma and I today are still our best of friends, and we've known each other now for over 20 years. And
so when did the concept of House of the Great Gardener start materializing? Like, was that something that happened on that third trip?
Oh no. At that point, I was known as Bonsai because of my weight training program. So like that's why we're getting that, because I have that lecture that I gave on stage on tape. Cool. So we're currently working on getting it digitized. I mean, it's just going to be me as a scrawny little 20-year-old kid. I can't wait to see it myself, really.
Yeah. So
So then, like after that, like with Soma, it was like the spiritual side and sort of purpose and really sort of honing your craft after that, I didn't go back to the High Times Cups. I mean, until like the end there, like 2012, 2011, maybe 2011, I think 2012, 2013. I started going back on a sort of regular basis.
was
Uh,
that by design, or did that
um,
life got in the way, or why did
yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, so after that, I went back to London, uh, and I mean, there's a different aspect of this. So in London, because of all my partying and everything, and doing like, I mean, just essentially, I say I've done thousands of trips of, acid mushrooms, ecstasy, uh, just hanging out, and those and any variations of mushrooms to ecstasy, acid to ecstasy. That's what I did on the dance floor thousands of times. But of those thousands of times, I've had a couple of experiences that were just completely different, outside of the realm of just a trip, right? Uh, it was just something different. I don't know. You talk to a lot of people that have done, a fair amounts of psychedelics, and they'll always tell you stories of nights or situations that fall outside of the realm of all the experiences that you've had. And for me, those experiences, and because of the books I've read when I was at school and stuff, of these sort of non-ordinary reality experiences, for me, I went on a quest to sort of figure them out. What are these things? Where do they come from? And the more I read all these books, and a lot of sort of shamanic books and shamanic experiences, and travel into this sort of uh, non-ordinary reality realm, and getting things done, not necessarily just going to the dance floor and partying the night away, but actually having sort of directional purpose. And in my quest to, like, I was just reading books, and I found this one book, and on the back of the book was called The Way of the Shaman, and in the back of the book was a phone number, and I called the phone number. They sent me like a pamphlet, and in the pamphlet had all these introductory to shamanism workshops, and one was just up the road in like Essex, near Windsor, and I called it up, and the weekend was like 2 weekends away, and they're like, yeah, sure, you can come, and I'm like 20, 21, 22-year-old kid, and they're like, sure, yep, come, bring a drum, bring this, or if you don't have a drum, don't worry about it. And I show up, and it's just like 8 elderly white-haired ladies, uh and then just me, right? And they're just like, wow, where did you come from? And right. So I told them, I spend a lot of time on the dance floors, and I've had these a couple unusual experiences, and in my quest to figure them out, it's brought me here, right? The rhythmic drum, and doing, and then having these experiences without the use of drugs. So anyways, I spent 2 or 3 years with these, maybe 2.5 years, hanging out with these ladies, doing, uh, working the drum, doing drum circles, learning intention, setting your intention, traveling to non-ordinary reality, and sort of getting things done and stuff. And we always you always set your intention at the beginning of the drum circle. And for me, my intention was always, how do I grow weed better? That was always my intention. I'm going to non-ordinary reality, my question is always going to be, how do I grow weed better, right? How do I grow weed better? So, I mean, in the early days, the answers I always got back were, well, why do you grow weed, right? And then sort of over the span of 2 years, it was always like this. It was always left to ponder on, why do you grow weed? And it's like, well, I got to pay my rent. It's like, so you grow weed, and your intention is to make money, so you can pay your rent, right? Pay your bills, and it fueled my party lifestyle. I didn't have to get a job. I could just go to school and party. And so that was your intention. It's like, do you think that, and it's like, do you think the plant understands that intention? I think there's like a symbiotic relationship there. So the plant, understands and wants to please you as much as you want to sort of please the plant, grow the plant. And the plant understands that, you need to grow money, then that plant is going to fulfill its energetic mission in life at what moment, right? And you go home and ponder on that. Like, what moment? I guess if I'm like growing weed for the intention to make money, then at the moment that money is exchanged, then the spiritual peak or energetic peak is reached at the moment that money is exchanged hands. And it's like, that's pretty interesting. Then it's like, in other words, it's like, how would you change that? How would you go about changing that? How would you change your intention? What do you want it to do? And you're like, I want it to get me stoned. I want to get stoned as possible. They're like, so you want to like grow it with the intention to get you as stoned as possible. Or that, how do you sort of go about doing that? And so I spent, I mean, the ladies, they always used to laugh at me about don't you want to know anything else? And you can ask anything else in the whole universe, any question you want. And all you're ever asking is, how do you grow better weed? How do you grow better weed? And they always used to laugh at me and sort of joke with me. And it was always interesting for me, because there's one story, because there's this one time that I tried to sort of journey on my own and set my intention, travel to like, say, the upper world, non-ordinary reality, connect with this sort of spirit entity, ask my question. But this time at home by myself, I was like, this time I'm gonna smoke this big fatty, and then I'm gonna set my drum. Like, I used to have a drum tape that you could sort of listen to get the rhythmic drum beat. And then I'm gonna travel in an non-ordinary reality, and I'm gonna like hang with the spirit of cannabis on my own terms, smoking weed. And I remember doing that, and all of a sudden this big, giant, black blob of nothingness sat on top of me. And I was like, what the fuck? And I couldn't breathe. And all of a sudden I'm like, holy fuck, I can't breathe. Right? And all of a sudden I'm in my head, and I'm like, I can't breathe. And I got to the point where I was like, oh my God, I got myself in a situation here, now I'm gonna die. And I was also doing some work with an indigenous elder I think it was the Muncie Reserve. Her name was Grandmother Blackbird. And right at that moment that I thought I was gonna die, she appeared and was just like, breathe. And I was just like, and I sort of came out of it. And my girlfriend just came home at that point, and I was sitting on the couch, and she was like, what the fuck happened to you? White as it goes. She's like, oh fuck, what the hell happened to you? So I told her what happened to me, and then I ended up going to the ladies and told them my story, and they were like, you smoked weed. And I was like, what? What's the big deal? And they're like, well, you're doing like intentional work, traveling to non-ordinary reality. When you add substances to it, it's like when you do it with the drum, it's like you travel to non-ordinary reality, and there's a door. And you get to that door, and you can ask your question through the door. And things can come to the other side of the door. And there's always like jokesters, and there's little things you can do to make sure that they're telling the truth, just like in real world, right? Someone's not telling you the truth, ask them another question, but you have control of the door. But when I decided to smoke weed, Now I took the door away, or when you go partying or do mushrooms or do all these substances, now you're going to non-ordinary reality. You don't have the control, and the door is gone. So now what happened is probably something on the other side saw you, and because there was no door, just decided to cling on to you. And for whatever reason, could be like a childhood trauma or something of your life that you just haven't dealt with yet in your life, and you're currently not prepared to deal with it, globbed onto you. And I always remember that story. I was like, holy fuck, this is some serious shit. So anyways, so the end of that story, I'm gonna describe, because it happened in the future at an ayahuasca journey, and it was the culmination of essentially of all that work in intention was shown to me by the tall blue luminescent beings of the land of ayahuasca. And it was shown to me on like a reel to reel camera, like remember the old reel to reels, and it was like, okay, now we're going to show you the difference between growing weed with the intention to make money versus the intention to make somebody feel better. And the movie started up, just classic old school. And it was a guy on a bicycle, and the guy on the bicycle was going down the sidewalk and stopped at the house. And this guy was buying weed for the intention to make money. So the guy came out of the house, and at the moment that the weed and the money exchanged hands, the weed lit up like with like a bright blue light. Right, and the guy put the weed in his pocket, and the blue light was like emanating out of his pocket. And the guy continues on, goes home, and the blue light's slowly diminishing. And he goes home and he sits on his couch, and he rolls it up and he lights it up, and just like a little bit of blue light sort of goes inside the guy. And then the whole scene rewound, and it's like, now it's gonna be cannabis grown with the intention to make somebody feel better. And the whole scene rewound, started all over again. The guy went up to the house on his cool bike, and the guy came out of the house, sold him the weed, nothing happened, put the weed in his pocket, went home, same scene on the couch, rolled up the weed, but the moment that he lit the doob up, the blue light filled up and just emanated out of the guy's body. And the tall blue luminescent beings looked down at me and said, that's the difference. So for me, after London, I ended up, my journeys ended up telling me to figure out how to grow weed with the intention to make people feel better. I needed to move out west. And literally about a week after that weekend, I told my girlfriend, I'm jumping in my car, I'm driving out west, I'm going to follow the signs to find a place where I can grow weed with the intention to make somebody feel better. And I did. So that jumped in my car, and I drove across Canada. I remember being in the prairies, and I remember looking where I was coming from, and it was just like the crazy thunderstorm. And then I looking to where I was going, it was like the magnificent sunset, right? And then just sort of following these little signs all along the way. I started looking for houses in like Chilliwack, right? Like, oh, you guys got houses for rent? The guy was like, what, are you coming here to grow weed? We don't want you here, right? I'm like, holy fuck, not staying here. Go to the next, and I drive to the next town, right? Kelowna, and then I got to Vancouver, and I had a friend that she lived in Vancouver, and I, started looking for places, and I showed up at her place, and all these people were partying and doing cocaine, and this one guy's like, oh, is this your weed buddy? Oh, I can't wait for you to grow weed, man. I can't wait to smoke. That's gonna be awesome. I'm like, holy fuck, I'm not moving here. Right? And I jumped on the ferry to Vancouver Island, and I picked up the newspaper, and like right in the newspaper was like funky cool house, dead end on the ocean. And I called it up and totally clicked with the lady. By the time I got off the ferry and went to her place, seagulls cawing, and she was a total little hippie mama, and told her my story. No, I didn't tell her about the weed and stuff. I told her I was coming out here looking for a place and gonna fly back and get my stuff and then drive back out. It was like $800 a month for the whole house, and then she let me keep my car in the driveway, and then I flew home and finished my last grow and packed up my stuff, built a little grow room in the back corner of the U-Haul, powered with like battery lights just to keep some genetics alive. Drove them all the way across country. So that would have been like what I would have had, like the original shishka berry in that truck. I would have had. I still have I don't have the original Afghani that I had, but I still have the genetics. In there, Black Domina, some chemo. Like, I mean, brought all those out and moved into that house and set up a grow.
And was the intention to produce biomass, or were you already starting to think about breeding, or where was your head at that?
I had done a couple breeding projects. Like, I mean, I had a room in like the original barb cross of the shishka berry into the Afghani was done in London, and I brought the seeds out to BC with me. So I had done a few crosses. The white Russian that I had. I had that cross with a few things that we had. Nothing real serious, just sort of the first preliminary, have a male. Hey, let's make a couple things. Nothing, yeah, too intentional. Yeah. And I mean, then that house was set up, and then I'd set the grow up and everything, and I didn't. And then I was like, well, now I'm gonna go find a place to sell this, right? And I ended up going to there was a head shop in town called Sacred Herb, and I went to Sacred Herb. Owned by Ian Hunter, ancient cannabis knowledge, and those guys go way back. And they directed me to the Vancouver Island Compassion Society. And then I gave those guys a call, and I ended up talking to Philippe Lucas, who was the founder of the VIX. And I made an appointment to meet him at the local coffee shop in a couple days or the next day or something. And I had this big mason jar, and I had about eight different varieties, and on the stem I had the little name tag of what each one was, and up or down, and then I gave it to him, and he's like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "You could call it my business card." And he was like, "Okay, I'll give this to my guys, and we'll give you a call next week or something, right?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." And the next day he calls me up and gave me the address to the club, said, "Come on down." So this is like 2001, 2002, and said, "Come on down to the club." And then from there, I sort of told him what my story and my intention and what I wanted to do, and I mean, it became a perfect fit. And yeah, I mean, I think remember the first crop I had all one kind. I had like 5 pounds of one kind, and they were like, "Well, we'll take a 1 QP," and I was like, "What? 1 QP? I have like 5 pounds." And they're like, "Wow, we have like 100 members, and we don't really sell a lot of weed." And then they were like, "Well, if you had 10 different kinds, we would take 10 QPs." And I was just like, "Wow, okay, cool." That was the oh, I need variety. And then from there, I mean, that goes into, and then I was working with the club for a couple years. The club itself, they had gotten busted because someone had broke into the club and stole all the weed. And Phil at the time was like, "Well, I'm going to report it," and called the police. And the police showed up and were like, "You're reporting that someone broke into your store and stole all your weed?" Right? So they ended up finding the guy, and they call Phil down to the station to identify the weed. They're like, "Is this all your weed?" And Phil's like, "Yep, that's our weed." So then the cops come down to the club the next day and arrest Phil because, you can't have weed. Weed is illegal. What do you mean you have a store and you sell weed? So they were going through trial for that, and then he ended up winning. Great praise from the judge, and the only thing that the judge said that he sort of disapproved with was that Phil was still acquiring his weed from the black market. Right. So I was sitting in the courtroom, and one of the other growers was sitting there. And after that court case, we went to the park and we essentially designed a facility that we were going to build to take full control of seed to sale for the Capacity Club. So we had a doctor friend who ended up buying the house, and then we ended up building this whole facility. It was probably like a 30 light facility. Had like four different rooms, and we ended up giving it to the Vics in exchange, because for me it was my opportunity to get rid of the dollar, because at the time I felt the only way that I could grow weed fully with the intention to make people feel better was to get rid of the dollar value completely. So for me, within the contract was you only were to pay me a $30,000 a year salary, and then whatever I produced out of this facility, it was to the club, right? So then I could completely focus on my intention to grow weed to make people feel better. So that facility got up and running in like 2000, maybe the end of 2000 or the beginning of, say, 2003, and then was busted in 2004. Cops showed up, and we had, so at that time, the medical licenses were just beginning. So we had a license on site for 11 plants. We were legal for 11 plants on site. Now we had 1,100. But when the cops showed up, we were like, hey, wait a minute, like, we have a license with Health Canada. And they're like, cops had no idea what we were talking about. They're like, what do you mean you have a license? You have a license to grow weed? And so they called Health Canada. Health Canada was closed. They didn't have they didn't have the 24-hour hotline at this time. So it was closed, and the cops were like, well, we're taking it all. And then that launched the constitutional challenge that we ran against the government. And that's when I met Kurt Tusaw. Kurt Tusaw came onto that with John Conroy.
So was that you who was spearheading that challenge, or how did that work?
Well, so it was the contract that I had with the Vics was, and it was the best clause I had probably ever wrote in my life, was that if anything happens, that you guys have to cover the legal bills. But it was designed right from the get-go that this place was going to be raided. Like, just as an example, like during trial, we had a ledger at the grow of what we produced, and then we had also a ledger at the Vics that what was received and what was sold, so we could track everything, to the point where like tens and 100 kilos of weed that went through it was like 1 gram off at the end of the day. And the Crown prosecutor was like, what happened to that gram? We're like, what are you talking about? 1 gram? It dried up. Like, I mean, 1 gram difference. Come on now. So yeah.
So you met, so what, ultimately you met Kirk, you worked through that case. What was the ultimate result from that?
So we won that case. And we won it on 2 fronts, because at the time you were only allowed, was it 3 licenses under one roof, and 1 grower could only grow for 1 other person. So we won the case, found unconstitutional. It took the government a year to fix the mistakes. And they came back at the end of the year and said, you're right. 3 licenses under 1 is unconstitutional. We'll change it to 4. And you're right. The 1-to-1 ratio for grower to patient is unconstitutional. We'll change it to 2. So, I mean, it took us 6 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to just push that little bit forward. But the other part about it is that me, as a grower associated with the Compassion Club that had 1,100 plants, got an absolute discharge at the end of the day and walked out of the court a free man, which set the precedent, right? So then after that court case, what happened in Canada was essentially the proliferation of dispensaries all over the country, because I would get a call from Kirk every other week that said, oh, I got a guy that got caught growing for this dispensary. You had 500 plants. Surely, Your Honor, that my client with only 500 plants deserves an absolute discharge like Mr. Barron, who had 1,100 plants. Absolutely, dismissed. Dismissed 800 plants, dismissed 500 plants. Grower after grower after grower started getting, they weren't even going to court anymore. They were just like, what do you have, 100 plants, 200 plants, right? They're just throwing them out of court. So then all of a sudden you had this proliferation of dispensaries all over the country that sort of came out of that court case, which ultimately led right into legalization.
That's amazing. Did you lose any genetics that you weren't able to recover or had somewhere else?
So we lost the original Shishkaberry in that. We lost another strain that was called Princess. It was a bubblegum Romulan sweet skunk cross. That it was the #1 strain at the club. Pain. It was the best. I mean, I have seeds of it, and we've tried to go in and find that pheno, but I don't know. It's just the magic of it. We've just never been able to get it right again.
So coming off this win, Matt, what was the next step? Like, how you did you see the writing on the wall? Did you see legalization coming? Were you trying to position yourself in that way, or were you shying away from that in some way? Like, what was?
No, I mean, when they busted that facility, it was called the Vancouver Island Therapeutic Cannabis Research Institute. When they busted that facility, we set the facility back up 3 weeks later. We told the cops, hey, we have the license and we're going to set back up and we're just going to abide by the rules. And then ended up getting more licenses and then pretty much rode the license, game for 15 years, essentially. Probably, I don't know if it was sort of at the end, I came to the conclusion that I could produce seeds of the strains. So maybe I'll go back a little bit, because we ended up starting our pheno hunts using the members of the club. So it was maybe, I guess we had developed at the VIX, sort of sativa to indica range of genetics. We came to the conclusion that, say, Afghani that worked good for pain only worked for, like, say, 2 out of every 3 people. And then that third person, for whatever reason, that Afghani didn't work for them. So he needed something else, right? So we had pretty much a great library of genetics that we knew worked for someone coming in for depression. We got something for you. Someone coming in for glaucoma, we had something for you, right? And then Phil, who currently now has got his PhD in cannabis drug policy and all that. He was doing studies and he was working with a lot of the guys back then, and we were on our way to do these double blind pain protocol studies with the club. And from there, it was the Haoma, the Perps crossed with the Afghani. We had like 5 phenos. I had the one that I liked the best, but we were like, hey, let's get the members to try the phenos and see which ones they like. So then we ended up making this card, and it had like 5 phenos, and I ended up making a deal with the VIX that if someone takes the card and if they put all 5 phenos up on the menu and someone smokes them all and fills in the, taste, smell, burnability effects, all that, and they bring the card back, I'll give them a free gram of weed. So it became like this program that the members just loved. But what happened out of that was the pheno that they categorically love the most, was my least favorite. Right? It was like the crazy dank couch potato, just fucking wreck your day weed. And I'm like active and creative. I like to smoke weed and get things done and stuff. So the stuff that knocks me down, I'm not a big fan of. But the members of the club who are in pain and things like that want that pain and want that stuff, we're like, no, this is the pheno we want. So for all of a sudden, it's like, holy shit, we have absolutely no business choosing any of the phenos for the members of the club. So after that, that was a huge revelation. And then it was like, wow, what if you had the seeds, right? Like, because clubs are getting busted, and someone comes in and they figure out that the Afghani works for their pain, but also they can buy the Afghani seeds, and then if something happens to the club, they still have the Afghani seeds in their fridge or something. So it's not like a total loss to the psyche of, oh shit, I lost what works for me. Right? I have the seed, there's still hope. So for me, that was the start of the seed company, was getting the seeds, and then every strain that I put on the menu of the club at the Vix, I tried to have the seed variety available for them also. And then so we were just making seeds, and then that was like right around 2009, and that's when Soma invited me to Spanibus to go hang out with him. And then after that, that's when, because the High Times guys were hanging out in the same hotel that Soma was at, and then the famous quote of the weekend was, "Hey, I can't believe I came all the way to Barcelona, and the best hash I smoked is that dude over there from Canada." So then from then, the High Times guys, all Matt Stang and all those guys, they invited me to enter the High Times Cup in Amsterdam after that trip.
Were you entering as the Great Gardener at that point, or is that
the first time we entered at High Times, we actually entered as Hog, House of the Great Gardener, and we had House of the Great Gardener. But we hadn't we were still so I have these t-shirts that say sort of Hog across them. But there's a nutrient company here on the West that's also called Hog. So, and then we asked a bunch of people, what do you think, Hog or House of the Great Gardener? And everyone was like, you gotta go House of the Great Gardener. Hog. You don't want to be called Hog.
Is there a story there, Matt? Like, is that from is that pulled from anything? The House of the Great Gardener?
Oh yeah, the Great Gardener. The Great Gardener is actually like a Peruvian. He's the Peruvian god that looks over all vegetation on Earth. So I met the Great Gardener. It's another ayahuasca journey, and again the tall blue luminescent beings were there, and it started. So this story starts off in. It's like, like the operating rooms where they have like the viewing gallery, and you can like look over the operation, what's going on. So I'm up in the gallery with two tall blue luminescent beings, and we're looking down on a guy that's lying on the table, and there's these other two blue luminescent beings that are taking their arms and going right through the body and pulling out all this black goo that was in the person. And I'm up top going, holy cow, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we're giving this person their purification treatment. And I'm just like, that's cool, right? That's pretty cool. And then I'm looking, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, wait a minute, that's me on the table, right? And right at the moment that I noticed that, they're like, you're all done. It's like, and I went through this door, and went through the door, and there was a staircase on the other side of the door, and the staircase just went way up into the sky. And I started walking up the staircase, and all of a sudden I was on this huge platform way above Earth. and across the platform there was this like old guy, long white hair, long white beard. He had this massive pipe that he was like puffing on. And I was like, oh, and he was like puffing on it, giving me like the side eye. And I sort of walk over to him, and he gets up and goes over to the edge, and he looks down on the edge, and he like takes a couple puffs, and he looks at me, and he's like, having a good time down there, are you, Mr. Barron? And I was like, oh man, I'm having a great time. And he's like, you're doing great work. You just keep it up, doing awesome, right? And I'm like, oh, no problem, right? Cool. And then the next day, so I had this cool experience, right? The next day after that, because we here on the island, we used to fly up shamans from Peru to conduct the ayahuasca ceremonies. This is like the traditional Amazonian medicine society here on the island. So after everyone's telling their stories, and I tell everybody my cool story of this guy I met and told him what he said, and my girlfriend Sarah, she brought this book of a famous ayahuasquero from Peru who had drawn all these paintings of non-ordinary reality, and beside all the images are all these little descriptions of all the snakes and fucking weird shit and stuff all in the pictures, but in the description it describes everybody, and we're sort of flipping through the book, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, that's the fucking guy I told you about. The old white robe, white hair, holding on to the fucking pipe and everything. I'm like, that's the fucking guy, man. I'm like, what does it say? And I read over in the description. It's like, this description is the deity called the Great Gardener, the one who looks after all vegetation on Earth. And I was like crying. I'm like, oh my God, I met the Great Gardener, and he said I was doing a great job. Right? So great. So that's where the Great Gardener comes from. The House of is just homage to 80s kung fu movies, because I was that kid. So that's where the House of the Great Gardener name came from.
That's amazing, bro.
So I have Mossy Giant. You know the artist, the Mossy Giant. He does a lot of cannabis art in the European cannabis scene and everything.
I don't know if I do.
Yeah, so look him up, Mossy Giant. So I told him that story, and then he did a rendition of that story, and he actually I could sort of. Yeah, you're not going to be able to see. Oh, sort of.
Oh,
so this painting where it's like the staircase and there's me, and then there's the big picture of the Great Gardener and the ayahuasca vine all around it, and so he did that. I think he sells the prints on his website. He might still have a few left.
That's super cool, man.
Yeah. And then the image, so you can sort of see the image on here.
Yeah.
But the real image, the guy has a body, right? So the guy, that image has a body. So that image I was drawn to, I think when I first came to like Victoria, it was in a book and I just saw it. I was like, wow, that's a super cool image and I love it. And someday I'm going to get it tattooed on me. And then during my trial, I ended up getting it tattooed on me. And then I was hanging out with Chris Bennett one day at his old urban shaman shop that he had in Vancouver. And then he had a book and he was flipping through it. And I had it tattooed on my leg at that time. And because he was like, oh, that's a cool image. I've seen that before and blah, blah, blah. And he sort of shows it to me. And he's like, oh, did you know like the history about that image? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, well, it comes from like the Tin Shin mountain range around Mongolia. It's actually a cave in Kazakhstan. But it's believed to come from the Haoma-Soma tribes of the first people that cultivated cannabis. And I'm like looking at him. I'm like, is that for real? I'm like, is that for real? And he's like, you knew that, right? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, and one of those another moment where you start to get a tear in your eye. I'm like, I had no idea that image was associated with a cannabis tribe before I got it tattooed on me. I got it tattooed on me because I was drawn to the image.
Dude, that's so cool.
Right? So, yeah.
Okay, so you're starting off reproducing seed to make sure medical patients have at least an insurance policy to prevent against disruption or help keep them having access to a solution that works for them.
Yeah.
At what point did you recognize Barbara Bud was special? Like, was it a male that you identified, or was it a female?
No, cut. It was like we had the cut.
Okay.
Breeder Steve and NYPD, they were close friends in London, and a lot of Breeder Steve stuff was floating around London. So
Okay.
it was the original Shishkaberry cut, and for me, it wasn't necessarily it had anything to do with hash. It was my favorite smoke to smoke. I mean, even Barbara Bud, that sort of uplifting, social, creative aspect, fruity flavor, all comes from that shishkaberry and just my absolute love of smoking that weed all day long. Right? Like it's not. I feel tired. I have to take a nap. It's just a daily driver of a pleasant experience. So, and so it wasn't until I started working with the Vancouver Island Compassion Club, and then their hash maker Chad. That's what his job was. He was the hash maker, and he had a full on passion for hash in every form. I mean, it was just great to watch and see. And when he got his hands on Barbara Bud, he was like, "Do you know how much hash this fucking strain makes? Falls off of here like like nothing else he's ever seen." And to the point, I mean, Chad. So I mean, Chad. I don't know if you know the story of Chad Compassion. I mean, so Chad is the guy that named Resin. So
Damn.
Chad used to use like a double boiler. It was like a pot with just like a silver bowl in it. Put water in the pot and put the silver bowl in it. And in his process of making hash, he would use that process just to sort of press hash together. And in that process of pushing it like across the bowl, he noticed that there was like a residue left on the metal bowl. And then he started collecting it. And he's like, "Look at this stuff. This stuff is like weird. This stuff is like, we would put it in a bowl, and there was no swing arms. No, we didn't have any. None of that existed yet. This is I think it was like 2005 or something like that, 2004, 2005, that he started making these discoveries. And he would collect this stuff. We would put it in a bowl, and we put a flame to it, just liquefy it, and just disappear. Right? We're like, holy shit! So then we got the titanium spoon. And hey, one sec. And then we were smoking out of titanium spoons, and then he got like this made. He got like this pipe, this upside down bell pipe made. That like this is like one of the first rosin purpose devices ever made, and we would smoke the rosin through this, and we put it in the pipes, and you just smoke it like that. And he ended up taking a bunch of photos. You can even go on the old Overgrow. He was on Overgrow, and he was known as Compassion. It was like COMP hash and he was like, "Hey everybody, check out this cool stuff I made," and I don't know what it is, and he ended up calling it rosin. And he got that inspiration from his girlfriend at the time, Sarah. who's my girlfriend now. Anyways, but she had a violin and she had a rosin bag that she used to, do up the strings on the violin. And then that violin was the inspiration for Chad to be like, oh, rosin. And he sort of looked it up and the word rosin. He's like, that's perfect. That's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it cannabis rosin. Right. And then so for us, it wasn't really like a thing. And there wasn't really much internet or anything at that time for it to take off. There's a few guys out there that sort of saw it and went with it. And then, fast forward, it's funny because I remember being at the Legends of Hash in Amsterdam. It was my second time. And I remember being there and I was like, oh, I'm bringing rosin here next year. Right. And I mean, stuff happened at the VIX and then, Chad ended up moving on. And so nobody was around that really had that passion that he had for hash. We were just trying to make hash and not so much rosin. Rosin was just like this weird thing that you had a byproduct of trying to press hash for us. And I remember having that thought, though. I was like, oh, if I came to the Legends here with this rosin stuff, I bet you these guys would be these guys would be blown away by it. And then that year was the year that Soil Grown squished his first bud. And then, the rest is history after that and where it went to. But Chad, the original, the hash maker of the VIX, is essentially the guy that made rosin. And Barbara Bud was one of those strains that he used in those early times because the Barbara Bud was so gooey and delicious.
And Barbara Bud was Breeder Steve's cut of the Shishkaberry to what?
So I took that cut and then I crossed it with an Afghani 1 from Sensi Seeds.
Okay.
Because the Shishkaberry was a little floppy at the end of its cycle. The buds had trouble holding themselves up. So my intention was to put the Afghani into it as just solid, pure structure.
Yeah.
And then, I think I've crossed it maybe 4 or 5 times into itself over the years. And it sort of is what it is today. So after that, the first stuff we entered in High Times was actually a Warlock Hayoma hash, and it was a single screen dry sift. And there was only one of us in the collective that had the hands delicate enough that could pull off a full melt single screen dry sift. So it was funny because we were all sitting around one night and we're like, all right, just toss it on and let it bounce, right? And then just collect that underneath. And we were all trying to just make it. And the one guy, he was the best at it, so he ended up making it. And that was the entry that we ended up entering into the High Times Cup, and it ended up going into the concentrate category because they didn't have a category at the time. I didn't think they had the nether hash category at the time, so it ended up going in the concentrate category. And we were just like, we had one of those canal boats we rented, and the whole crew was there, and we were all hanging out. The awards time, and then all the awards come, and they're like, second place. They're like, Great Gardener Fire, or House of the Great Gardener. We're all like, holy shit, right? Are you kidding me? Well, we're all running up on the stage. Greenhouse and Paradise and all these fucking, Sensi Seeds and all these juggernauts are up on the stage. And all of a sudden there's like these kids from Canada that are up on the stage. But after that, the great thing about that after was the older generation that sought me out. They all were like, hey, are you that kid with the dry sift? Right? Because it melted. And at the time, there wasn't too many people that were experiencing liquefied dry sift. Like, it just wasn't. They're like, how the fuck did you make that? Right? What's going on here? So I ended up making a friends with a whole bunch of guys, and because of the piece was a Warlock, which was serious seeds. I ended up meeting Simon from Serious Seeds, and then we ended up becoming great friends, and we are to this day, to the point where he's essentially one of my major mentors in the breeding game. I've spent essentially the last maybe 9 years, it's coming up on 10 years, on the European circuit, doing all the shows, Prague and Spanibus and all the other shows, and then the hash maker to Sirius was this old guy, Renee. And Renee, I mean, if you went to the Legends dinner in Amsterdam, Renee was the guy who was sitting at the table, and every single person that you looked up to in the hash game was waiting in line to talk to Renee. Right? It was like, and I was like, who is that guy? Right? And then he ends up telling me to sit down, and I had so many varieties of hash that I went back and forth with him about 8 times. I would fill the bowl and give it to him, and he'd be like, "Oh, that's pretty nice," and he would fill the bowl and give it back to me, and I was like, "Oh, that's great," and I'd fill it back up, and then we ended up becoming really good friends over the years, and yeah, I mean, just amazing.
That's incredible. So would you say that like your entry point into the European market and sort of cannabis culture was through winning cups with hash, and then from there you moved into your seed line?
Essentially, I had a couple of seed lines. I had, like, I think Haoma and Barbara Bud were sort of early. I mean, we had the Jack Herrera. Because Soma introduced me to feminized seeds and helped me figure out how to make feminized seeds. So, like, the Jack Herrera that we have, we call it Jack A. It was just like, I mean, Jack Herrera in BC was a thing back in the day, right? So that was one of our first fem projects, was that Jack. And then, yeah, like the Treating Yourself expos in Toronto started up, and we started entering into those, and yeah, I mean, we just started. I mean, we ended up going into probably Barbara Bud's big splash was Mila's Dabadoo at the Resin Club in Barcelona. So really, there weren't too many clubs in Barcelona back then. The Resin Club, it was owned by Resin Seeds, was the place to be. Everyone was there. And Mila had one of her first Dabadoos there, and we entered, I do believe it was just bar water hash. And I remember sitting there, and I was talking to these UK guys, and they were announcing the winners, and all of a sudden it was like, then the winner, House of the Great Gardner. And I was just like, what? And then they were like, what? And I'm like, that's me. I just won. And the guys that were talking to, they were like, oh my God, we were talking to you all night long. And then I remember, because when I went to go get the award, Mila made a comment that was, every single entry every single scorecard that was handed in had Barbara Budd as number one. Not one entry didn't have it as number one. She thought it was amazing. And then after that, that's when it sort of took off. There was maybe, like, I mean, if I go this year to Barcelona and enter in the Dabadoo and win something, it's like 10 years worth of Dabadoos. It's been 10 years essentially.
And there's a tremendous amount of European groups who have now taken your work and run with it in their own directions.
Oh yeah, the boys over at the Growers with Attitude, DJ Confa. So I remember DJ Confa, he'd always come by the booth, and he was always asking us questions about dry sift, how to make it better, how to do this, how to do that. And then he showed up one year, and I was just like, the fuck? That is just fantastic hash, my friend. And I think it was the Monsters of Rosin, sort of. It was like the competition that predated the Masters of Rosin. And he won first place with the Barbara Bud, and then I won second place with my Barbara Bud, right? And I was like, well, that's it. The student has passed the teacher. I'm like, I don't need that. I don't need to enter Barbara Bud anymore. If all you guys are going to enter Barbara Bud and win all the time, I'm like, my work is done. So yeah. So then those guys, so his cut, he's won. I mean, he's probably won 20 something awards with his Barber Bud cut. They call it the Spanish barb. And then he did a project with the La Colada guys and the Grateful Seed guys, and they crossed it with the papaya and made the Fruit Joy. And last year at Spanibus, I probably had 4 different companies hand me Barber Bud crosses of something or another. So it's great. I mean, it's fantastic to see.
Is there a difference between this was it the Spanish cut?
The Spanish cut versus my cut?
Yeah.
I don't know. His is probably maybe fruitier. I think his is a bit more fruity, because with the Barber Bud, you're either going to get like the hardcore fruit, or you're going to get that sort of the Afghani body buzz. And I mean, if you get the right Barb Pheno, it's like a no ceiling soaring high. Like if you have, I remember they were growing it in Morocco, and I went there once to check out the field, and we were smoking a bunch of it, and it was like, it just kept going higher and higher and higher. We were all laughing and giggling, and like not in an unpleasant way, just in a pure, delightful. Even to this day, Barber Bud in Morocco is a favorite amongst for the terpenes, and the terpenes are long lasting too. So the Moroccans like to mix the Barber Bud in with the not so terpy things.
That's incredible. So, as you're touring in Europe and gaining notoriety, are you consciously making an effort not to leverage that over to Canada, or is it just the way the climate was, there wasn't an opportunity to?
I mean, what were you going to do in Canada? I mean, you sort of, I mean, like Canada and brands and things like that with the dispensaries. Like I was probably one of the first guys that was like, hey, put my name up beside my strain. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? You want people to know that it's you? Right? I mean, that's the era we came from, right? Like it was, you didn't tell anybody what you were doing. There was no, and like I remember when I wanted to put a House of the Great Gardener sticker on something. People are like, you just want them to come and find you right away? Right? Your heat score. What do you mean you want? So in Canada, it wasn't quite developed yet with the brands. The brands in Canada really didn't come until the sort of dispensary waves of, I don't know when it really hit. It was like 2013 and in 2014 and beyond, sort of there, that sort of stretch into legalization. But before all that, I mean, there was no brands, nowhere to really sell your stuff. I used to sell my seeds at the Vancouver Seed Bank in Vancouver, but I mean, there was nothing developed here. That's why Europe was such a great thing. I wasn't allowed in the States. I got banned out of the States probably 2009. And then so I never went to any of the American Cups or anything. I always wanted to, like, I think during that time, because it wasn't just the resin. Like back then it was more the like development of the techniques, right? Like, the first one I entered was a single screen dry sift. That's it. Nothing else. And it bubbled and liquefied. And I mean, you try to do that. Like, I can't do it. I mean, it takes a certain delicacy to be able to pull that off. And then the sort of multiple screens came, you do a couple screens and then sort of water hash, and then water hash techniques got better, right? Don't use the blender, right? But blenders are bad. Blenders are bad. You got to just use a paddle, and then for us, it was like, well, how good can we make dry sift, and then like sifting and static tech sort of came out, and now you can like clean out the capitate stocks and just have trichome heads, and it's like, oh, that's cool. And you're like, and then someone tells you, like, well, but like 80% of all terpenes are like gone by the time your cannabis is dry. It's like, well, fuck, I don't want all those terpenes. What do we do? Right? It's like, well, can we fresh freeze? Because fresh frozen water hash was starting to become a thing, right? It's like, oh, just freeze your weed first. People are like, what are you talking about? You just got to put your fresh weed in the freezer, right? I mean, people would like make fun of you and stuff back then for trying this stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's a thing. Oh, that's a fucking definite a thing, and it's like, well, can I put fresh frozen weed into a tumbler in the freezer, and therefore I'm avoiding the terpene evaporation? And so we did that, and it's like, wow, now we have to pull it out of the freezer and it's wet, and we have to pizza box dry it. It's like, wow, now we're still losing the terps. And that's when we were out to dinner with Robert Clark one night, and we were telling him about it. And Robert Clark, it was just such a student teacher moment, because he was just like, just get a freeze dryer. And we're like, well, what the fuck is that? What's a freeze dryer? And he's like, freeze dryer? Oh, wow, freeze dryer. And Rob Clark goes into the molecule from the solid state to the gaseous state, bypassing the liquid state, and telling us all this. So, right away we're like, oh, I gotta get a freeze dryer. So I remember having a freeze dryer, and then showing up at Barcelona being like, oh, this is fresh frozen, sift, freeze dried, statically cleaned, right? Every year you had something new that you sort of did to the piece of hash. Like, I can go through the evolution of all the cups we have, and the piece of hash. No two pieces of hash are the same, right? We were like trying to figure out ways, because we used to they call it whiting out, right? Your piece of hash used to white out. And essentially, that's what kids want to do. That's what you do to your hash today. But back then, we tried to avoid it in every possible manner.
When you say whiting out, you mean keeping the hash being light?
No, when you first press a piece of hash and you put it in parchment, and it gets like that sheen to it.
Yeah.
But then after like 2 or 3 days, it like butters out. I guess that's another word, buttered out, and it gets that different consistency, more of the consistency that the kids like today, right? They purposely sort of cold cure it to what do they call it? Nuclear, or whatever they call it.
Nucleated, non-nucleated, or cold cure, fresh press, jam.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we were always trying to stop that process.
Yeah.
Anyways. But that was the evolution, right? So it gets you to today. It gets you to today, where it's the evolution in the technique. I mean, I'm not going to say that it stopped, but it's not as fast as it used to be. And now it's like, you make your fresh frozen, you make your hash, you press it, you put it in the fridge, and maybe everybody has a little different recipe on sort of temperature and time, but but now the focus is on genetics.
100%. That's what
now the evolution is purely on genetics, where the kids are taking the GMOs and the Barbara Buds and all the originals hash strains, and they're all crossing them in together now and pushing those return numbers up into like 8-10%. It's like, it's amazing, really. It's amazing. I once had Howard Marks. I gave him a piece of hash once, and he pulled it apart and looked at it and smelled it, and he looked at me and he was like, it's amazing to know that the next generation is taking it a little bit farther. And then last year at Spanibus, I sort of had that same sort of feeling, seeing what all these people were bringing in the sort of rosin and the creamy textures, and I was just like, wow, this is just amazing to see where this has come, and even now to where it's going now.
Do you feel confident that this culture is going to continue to grow, or do you feel that we're sort of threatened by electronic style consumption methodology, or is that just the natural progression that it's going to go?
I mean, I think that's the natural progression as you go. I think the perfect example of it is the Legends of Hash that you guys just had in LA, and there was only two dry sift entries in it, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
everybody's got their companies now, and everybody's got their brands, and then you got to sort of work the company, work the brand. I never sold any hash really. Like when I went to cups and stuff like that, they were all just like little personal projects in our grows that we were working on that little chunk of hash, right? I didn't just like harvest 10 kilos of rosin and I have it packed in the freezer and I'm gonna go win this cup, and now I can like unload it onto the masses, this cup winning hash. I mean, that wasn't the intention for us back in the day. Our intention was, how can we just make the best piece of hash possible?
Yeah, there was definitely a more pure intentioned.
I mean, for me, the best hash you can possibly make is fresh frozen, fresh frozen sift, freeze dried, and statically cleaned. I mean, that is essentially the pure, full, broad spectrum. I mean, you haven't done anything to it. You haven't,
fresh frozen.
For me, that's the holy grail.
How are you like freezing the arms of the plant on like cookie trays in freezers and then bouncing them on, like, how are you sifting fresh frozen?
So I have a little tumbler, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've seen it. I've seen the video.
Mila's pollinator tumbler.
You're doing that in the freezer?
Inside the freezer.
Amazing.
And then you take that sift and go straight into the freeze dryer with it.
Yeah.
And then statically clean it after. I mean, for me it was like the end of the train. It was like, okay. now I have the rest of my life to just. But you don't see
the mountaintop.
You don't see anybody else up there. I've had friends in the past go like, "Oh, how do you make that stuff? Oh, I'm gonna make a static clean company." I'm like, "Well, good luck with that."
Yeah.
They come back and they're like, "What the fuck?" I'm like, "That's hard. It's hard to do." I mean, I've had a couple of mechanical engineers sort of work on sort of static. How can you pull those trichome heads out using that? Like, I mean, it's the static. I mean, there's something to do. Until my nanobot swarm technology comes out that harvests trichome heads right off the plant in the field and then just brings them back to a jar for you, cleans them up on the way.
Well,
drops them in the thing.
There was a bit of I don't know if it's controversy, but just like whispers of potential issues when everybody started talking about the hand sifting in these last 2 years ago or whenever that happened, and I thought that was an interesting concept, but I mean it's very hard to commercialize.
Yeah. It's so hard.
Are you preferential to melt versus rosin? Like if you were to take that, and it might sound sacrosanct to say, but if you were to take that fresh frozen, dry sifted, freeze dried
And rod and press it.
and press it. Like what? Where do you stand on that?
No, I would never press. I mean, if I had, yeah, you wouldn't press it. No
Do you
need.
feel that there's some, medicinal or,
Like I think today, I think the kids, right? Because it's like, I just need my banger clean all the time. Right, so I think rosin will win out all the time. Will win every time in that playing field. Rosin will win every time. Right?
It's a convenience culture for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was explained to me once the sort of North American versus the European hash experience, where the North American is more like a visual. There's a visual component to watching the bubble, watching it, and sort of, oh, my banger's nothing left of my banger. Whereas a European, they don't really care about that, put the hash in their joint, and they're more conscious on the total overall experience of smoking the hash versus that sort of instantaneous visual type of high.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Like people that really like THC distillate and stuff, and I'm always just like, I don't get it. Like it's just so blah, so straight up and down type of high with sort of no roller coaster effect to it or anything like that. So,
yeah,
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, like in Canada, we have legalization, and now you can just go to the store, and my partner's kids are, buying stuff with terps in it that makes it taste awesome, but it's like those terps aren't, those are synthetic terps, and the kids are like, well, what do I care? It tastes great, right? It's like, I think you're going to have those little hash heads that sort of go down the rabbit hole of trying to find that holy grail puff. I don't, it'll be tough for them to get past that. My banger's clean.
Do you feel, or have you encountered varietals that you would prefer cured out as opposed to fresh frozen?
No.
That's fair. That's a fair answer.
Yeah, that's tough. I know, like the orange. I mean, for us, like it was like the orange strains were never good at sort of hashing, or making it into rosin. We never really like doing that. But
do you feel if we had better supply chain management in our legal system, or even in our legacy system, we would like fresh press would be more popular in Canada than it is, which is pretty much non-existent?
I mean, the problem is just there's no way to get fresh press to the market quickly. I mean, with farm gate and things like that, that's opening up. That we'll see that in the future. I mean, now with direct delivery, we can get products to a customer a lot quicker, and then if the customer has refrigeration systems to, I can get it from my fridge into my cooler into your freezer without having to go sit in the warehouse for a month before it gets to you.
Oh yeah.
I think that's all developing now. Like most stores I go into now, they have the freezer, and they're pretty aware of what they need to do with it. But I mean, I think as a whole, I think the rosin market is, I mean, it's such a small. It's like it's like the kids, right? Like my generation and people older than me, certainly the old just black hash guys, people. They're not quite too sure yet what to do with rosin, right? Oh, I have to buy a special thing to smoke it. So we'll see. We'll see over the next generation or two, sort of.
Oh yeah, I think that the traditional hash definitely still has a huge place in the market, and we're definitely seeing a lot of demand through the recreational numbers. But I feel like those recreational numbers are a bit misrepresented when there's like a pretty strong undercurrent in the more traditional market here in Canada supporting a lot of really talented artists creating super high quality resin.
And they're starting to come out. They're starting to come got guys like Brindle and Slurm.
100%.
I mean, these guys are, hash specialists, and that's what they're sort of, that's what they're good at, and that's what they're doing, and it's starting to come to market. So
let me ask you, when legalization was on the horizon in late 2016, 2017, what were your thoughts on what was going to take place? Like, did you feel like you were going to get a real seat at the table, and this was, something that was really great that was about to happen? Or did you have more of a negative outlook towards it?
I didn't really, I didn't have a negative outlook towards it. I mean, I was working with dispensaries at the time, and I thought it was more sort of out of our reach, right? At first, it was all these big players, and like you really had to have your shit together and know the business world and all that stuff. And I really wasn't too interested in it at first. The opportunity came across our table with Canopy, and so a bunch of our friends were already working at Canopy, and it looked like they were doing some good things and some interesting things, and so we ended up talking with those guys, and we ended up signing a deal for the brand and the sort of consulting deal to sort of help them with their systems. And it was good. I mean, we took some flack for it. We took a lot of flack for it, actually, but it wasn't so bad. Some of the people that were already working there maybe took a little more flack in the early years, right? It was legacy people didn't like people, I don't know, going to work in the legal. There was just a little bit of I don't know, animosity. But it was good because I got into Canopy's fucking billion-dollar empire, and they flew me around to all their facilities, and I gave them my opinion. At the same time, we started pheno hunting our own genetics in their greenhouses, and we got pretty far down the road until they shut down the BC facilities, which was, I mean, when they started those facilities, you weren't allowed to grow outdoors. There was no outdoor growing. So for the big players, their biomass was going to come out of the greenhouses. So they ended up buying these massive greenhouses to do all this biomass, and got them all cranked up. And then, the government changes their mind and says, well, we're going to allow growing outdoors, which sort of kiboshed the giant greenhouse projects. So that venture came and went, but it gave us the resources to go out on our own and start Great Gardner Farms. So we retrofitted one of our old facilities and started doing it on our own. It was great. The Canopy greenhouses, I mean, they were massive. Just to see it on those scales for me, and the experience alone for me was I mean, I got to sort of see the giant corporate machine, and it was just like, this is fuck. You can't get anything done in this. There's so many people that you need to sign off on. How do you get anything done?
Yeah, no, I think the amount of learning you would be able to do inside that greenhouse on somebody else's dollar, I guess, and see the failure at scale can be really, well, I'm sure
really it was more seeing the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you have such a great opportunity here. You're just not listening to the right people.
Yeah.
Right? You're listening to the accountant. Right? Why haven't you killed that plant there? Oh, because the accountant hasn't signed off on it. It's like, what the fuck does the accountant have to do with killing that plant? Right? So, anyways.
Absolutely.
But, it gave us the funds to do our own thing. So
what was the plan? What was the vision, and how did it start, and how's it going?
I mean, this facility, we probably only did 1/3 of the facility, just because even at the time we weren't. It was like, will they security clear me? Right? I mean, even Kirk was worried. Like, he's like, do I associate with criminals? Kirk's like, I'm a criminal lawyer. I mean, are they going to allow us? And I mean, it was interesting because during my trial, when I was getting the decision, the judge had made special comment that she was specifically not giving me a criminal record because when weed becomes legalized, that I should have an opportunity to participate in that program. So she was specifically not giving me a criminal record. So I have this letter, right? So if they turned me down, like we were totally like, we were almost like, hey, I hope they say no, so we could pull this letter out and call the media and make a big splash. But they ended up saying yes, and it was, I mean, from start to finish. I mean, for us, I think it was like 6 months or something. It was relatively quick. I think did we get a little preferential treatment? I mean, I think so. I think when you got a guy that fought you for 6 years and won, and you have a lawyer that's fought you on numerous levels all the way to the Supreme Court, it's probably in your best interest to hurry that application along and have a success story, right? And it wasn't just us at the time. At the time, there was great people out there, and it was like 6 to 8 months, and small micros started popping up, and now we're slowly capturing market share over and over and over and over, and yeah.
So what's the goal for the farm? Is it going to be all-encompassing processor with a cultivation, or is it just going to be a cultivation and feed a different processor, or what's the vision?
I mean, right now it's just a small micro, just producing cannabis flower. We started off doing a couple of genetics, but then sort of realized that the Canadian seed market really isn't a bread and butter thing here. It's more of a novelty. Right now, anyway. I think in the future, if it opens it up and I can sell seeds where all seeds are sold, I think it'll change a little bit, but it's not a big thing. So right now, this facility will just be flower, and then we'll do outdoor deals to do biomass for the concentrates, for the rosin and the hash and stuff.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm super stoked. I know you already had like a successful season with a crop. You did an outdoor was it a partner farm, or was that your farm, or?
It was a partner farm here in Shawnigan Lake.
Awesome.
And so we did. This was our third year. We did this year, and it was not the best of years, but it was interesting because we have a couple quick projects that we're working on. The sort of latest genetic project is called Quickening, we call it, and it's figuring out strains for outdoor in Canada to finish in we got one that finishes sort of second week in September. Barber Bud Pheno. We got two Barber Bud Phenos that finish in the first half of September. And so we're just working right now with a whole bunch of other crosses that have that quick. So it's interesting because we're not quickening the flowering time. The flowering time is still 8 weeks. What we're doing is we're selecting plants that trigger under like a 1410 light cycle. So instead of triggering under more of a 13 11, we can get the plant to trigger outdoors 2 weeks earlier than it normally would Therefore, it finishes still in the 8 weeks. And in Canada, right, you don't want to be harvesting your weed in October, unless it was this year because it was a perfect outdoor year for harvesting. But normally in October, you don't want to be harvesting your weed in Canada.
No, that's very cool. So, and then you have your seed company that's based in Spain. And are you working on any projects over there, or are you mainly focused on getting this micro off the ground here?
Yeah. Right now, the last couple of years has really been focused on the Spanish thing. Sort of runs itself, and it is what it is, and it's sort of set up there and does its thing. Yeah, I don't really have too much focus on it right now. Anyway, I mean, the seed industry in Europe I don't want to say it collapsed, but I mean, there are a lot of seed companies in Europe now.
Yeah,
It's gotten sort of washed out.
Do you feel like the last 10 years, cuts have been claimed to be tightly held but widely available in reality? Do you feel as though that's going to continue as the years go on, or do you think that people are going to start holding genetics or unique phenos more tightly to be able to build their brands around them?
Yeah, I think you're always going to have the cuts because people are always just going to, hey, I found this cut, it's fantastic, right? I mean, I think a lot of the sort of seed industry now isn't along the lines of I've created a set of seeds that 8 out of the 10 seeds look generally like each other. It's more along the lines of, hey, I took this and this and put it together, and somewhere in there you'll find something amazing. Oh, and by the way, 20% of them are going to be Hermy, right? It's like I've talked to a few people that they think there's almost like a seed catastrophe sort of in the works, just because there's so much crossing being done at just one level that people aren't working them out. That's the sort of, I mean, if I could go back and talk to the guy that started making seeds, like me, if I could go back and talk to that guy that started making seeds, I mean, for what I know now to what I know then, it's like, nah, it's like you got to do your homework and you got to work it out. And I mean, you can just take one genetic and just spend your whole life like working on it and fine tuning it and stuff. But today, you need such variety to be the new that it's hard to properly get any of that work done. Like for instance, like the CBD project, when we created the CBD Renee, the end of that project had to be 80% of the seed produce the 1-to-1 pheno, and we could take it to a lab and we can test it. And you can sort of test it out and know at the end of the project that you got to the actual end of a project and you got something worthwhile out of it. Today's world, I don't know. I mean, I see people throwing around the breeder tag, and you sort of ask a couple questions, and it's like, no, you just phenotyped out a bunch of seeds. You didn't breed anything. Just because you grew out all those seeds, you're not the breeder, right? So I don't know.
What do you feel about people naming a pheno of a breeder's work that isn't properly reflective of the name that breeder gave it? For example, if the breeder called something fruit basket and it smelt, and the pheno that was selected by the cultivator who purchased the seed pack smelled like rotting flesh, and you wanted to name it, zombie, the zombie pheno of XYZ strain, like, do you feel as though that's the right of the cultivator, or do you feel like that's stepping on some toes?
I mean, I think if you're giving homage to, if you're telling the story in a truthful manner, then I mean, what do you like? It's the person that takes that and names it, and it's like, oh, I've been working on this, and this makes up the story behind it. right? And then now the genetic gets lost because you actually haven't told me the truthful story of where you got it. If you sat there and told me, you're like, hey, I found this zombie genetic amongst the fruit basket, and I found two of them, and I crossed them into each other, and you know, I think I think the moment you I think at some point, the moment you change something, if you want to call it something else, I mean, you call it like, I mean, with say AK-47, you have like the cherry AK, right? The cherry AK has got like a famous reputation to it. But if you go talk to Simon and say, hey, what about this cherry AK? He's like, what are you talking about? What cherry AK? Right? He has no idea, right? Because someone at some point found a specific pheno that smells like cherry, and then that person became famous for whatever cup they won or whoever they were, and it takes on a new existence.
Do you feel as though we're slowly headed towards a more educated consumer who's able to discern between just a mixed polyhybrid smashed together and an actual worked line, like a filial line or any kind of worked line that a breeder has put time, energy, and effort into? Like, do you see that separation and that understanding starting to take place, or do you think that it's a long time till you're going to have an educated consumer market like that?
I mean, I think that, to the percentage of how much of the market is that person, I think will always be small, right? I mean, you take like the beer industry, and like the average beer drinker, if you take them to and show them all the different types of beer and stuff, there's some guys that'll tell you, oh yeah, this comes from here, this comes from there, this comes from there. But most people will be like, yeah, that's a dark beer, that's a light beer, right?
Yeah.
The amount of people that will take it upon themselves to educate themselves to the point that they can discern. For me, I'm still amazed at people that can sit in a coffee shop and pull out and start nitpicking. Oh yeah, this is a gelato. Oh, this is a runts. I'm like, how can you tell? They right? I mean, it's like, yeah.
I think that we've got to get to a point where we're either heading to a point where we get a more educated consumer group where they understand that there's the $40 pack, which has a lot of chances of misdirection and not getting what you're looking for there, and then the $400 pack, which is care, intention, work, and a high likelihood of finding something that is highly desirable, and then the spectrum between there. And what I worry is that we're headed towards this brand associated clout where
sure.
More
how many stories are out there of, hey, I bought this pack for $1,000 and it turned out bunk?
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of, you want that sort of the hype thing, right? I mean you have that in every industry. I mean, I could go sell you a Supreme T-shirt for $300. It's just a T-shirt at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the market now. I mean, some people just. I mean, when I go to Barcelona and things like that, I'm never really too interested. I'm interested more in the people than the sort of the hype of something. Like say like our French Fire barb that we have, like that French Fire seed. Some guy just gave me a pack of seed, and it just had one seed in it, and it had his business card stapled to it. It's called French Fire. And then we brought it home, lost the business card, but we had that one seed, and just in a box of like, hey, let's do a pick 5 things out of the box and grow them. and we grow this one seed, and this one seed on every single spectrum, growth, flower, smell, smoke, experience, it hit 10 on every, like, just a pure gem of gems, right? And it just came from this one seed. And we ended up putting it online. We're like, oh, we lost the card. Whose French fire was this? All of a sudden, the guy pops up. That was me, right? And we make this connection with the guy. And so for me, you're just never gonna know where you're gonna find a great thing. For me, and I'm never chasing. Like right now, I have a bunch of chemo crossed with the Romulan that we're growing. Like that roadkill skunk flavor is in there. It's just like, you sort of chase those flavors.
I mean, Shishka Berry by Old Widow won Legends this year. So, it's like.
What? Oh, yeah, sure. I can see that.
Yeah. So it's, all these hitters are just resurfacing. And I think that it's funny because, people shied away from them a few years ago. And now, when it really rubber hits the road, these are the things that are taking cups. So
they're the creators of new things. I mean, all the new things, like we have a new kid that works here, and he's just like a 20-something-year-old, loves weed and stuff, right? And we were talking about genetics, and I had the genetics in the room, and I'm like, oh well, this is crossing the cow. Let's go to a seed finder, and look up this genetic, and you look up the genetic, and it's crossed with this, and crossed with that, it's crossed with that thing. When you gotta like scroll through to get through all the genetics, right? And I'm like, now go type in that Afghani one, right? And he types it in, and it's like Afghani crossed with the Colombian.
Yeah,
it's like, and that's it.
That's it,
right? It's like you go back and find those things, and you get used to the smell of that original Afghani, that sort of pine smell. I'm like, you're gonna smell it in all these new modern day, and now you'll be like, oh, the Afghani smell.
How many building blocks do you think you need to be able to get the full color palette that is cannabis?
Robert Clark has it in this, what does he call them, the 7 major terpene classifications?
Yeah,
I think is the sort of current status on that. The 7 majors, and then the sort of breakdown from there.
Yeah,
almost like the color palette, really.
Yeah, interesting. So, as somebody who's crawled in the belly of the beast of a corporate giant that is, canopy growth and lived to tell the tale, what advice do you have for individuals like yourself dealing with larger white collar corporations like that?
I mean, they're tough. Read the contracts over and over again. I mean, yeah. I mean, if I didn't have Kirk as my partner, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing currently. There's just no way. As just a small town grower kid that, I've been growing weed for 28 consecutive years without ever shutting down the garden. I've had a garden on cycle continuously going for 28 years. And if I didn't have Kirk as my partner doing the contract and negotiations and things like that, there's probably no way I would do it.
Yeah.
I'd have got frustrated a long time ago and said, fuck you.
Yeah. What what advice do you have for guys transitioning in, like that you've learned both working for a big corporate entity and then going through the licensing? Like, what advice do you have for people following in your footsteps?
I mean, if you don't have a war chest to sort of back you up for 2 or 3 years, don't bother doing it.
Yeah.
And that's after you build and get everything to the point where you're operational. When you're like, that's, after the build. If you don't have enough funds to float your boat for 3 years, don't bother.
What do you see happening first in Canada and globally over the next 3 years?
I mean, look at Thailand. I'm like, I want to get to Thailand as fast as possible.
Straight up.
right? I have friends in Thailand that are like have shops and organic farms, and it seems like they're having a great time. I mean, I sort of hear things on both sides of the fence, but I mean, as far as I know, everyone's having a great time in Thailand right now. So, I think Canada was a model. Canada was the first. Canada was, you know, uh, what to do, what not to do. It's going to get better. Germany, I mean, all these countries, and I mean, America here at some point. I mean, it's gonna happen. I think, maybe not with Biden, but maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah,
Once it happens in America, I think you'll find the rest of the world will just fall, and I mean, it'll just become like just like alcohol, really.
that's the hope. I mean, if we get half of what alcohol has,
Totally. I mean, the lounge thing is going to be tough in Canada, right? You got the sort of anti-smoking sort of regime that's in there that it's going to be tough not to crack.
if we can do if dabs are, I mean, I don't smoke flower anymore, so I'm happy with my dabs, but I understand that smoking is and was a huge part of it for me. So
Yeah. I mean, you just got to look to Barcelona for that. I mean, you just make sure you put the crazy filtration
yeah,
systems
you
in.
get the good AC.
Like, it's totally possible to do. And just to have a blanket, no, that's not. You can't do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think that the consumption lounges will follow suit like a Barcelona, or do you feel as though Canada
I don't think so.
no?
Right? I mean, because of the fact, like when we applied for our what is it called, organoleptic smoking license for
Yes.
the LP here.
Yeah.
The one question that we got back was, well, how are you going to get around the indoor smoking employment rules, right? Which is essentially no smoking indoors. And it's like, well, like, I don't, we're going to smoke outside, and that was the solution, right? We had to smoke outside.
That's a bummer. Yeah, they got to figure that out. The amount of government paperwork that is involved in smoking the flower that you grow in the Canadian market is pretty insane.
If I have a bunch of leaf in my facility and I want to take it out to the compost pile, I have to have another person with me to witness it, and then has to fill out a form to attest to the fact that they witnessed me to destroying the leaf in the compost pile. So I mean, you want to talk about some ridiculous rules and things that are just like, what are you talking about?
I mean, it's getting better. We started with some pretty crazy rules, and we've still got some, but I don't think it's going to get truly better until the U.S. legalizes. The government that we have right now isn't comfortable being leaders in this space, and so we need somebody to take the lead. And then once somebody else has the lead here, we'll be fine to follow suit and be a little bit more stringent than the leader, and then we're okay to have that role. But overall, I think we did a really poor job executing on what we could have been global leaders in.
But you're at the first country to kick in the can. So
first guy through the door always gets shot, man.
You always have to realize that you have to appease the crazy lady that thinks that the kids are going to put the weed in the toaster oven and go to smoking, right? I mean, you have to, because that lady is a lady of parliament.
Yeah.
So you have to appease her. So you're not going to be able to go in there with, hey, we're just opening up a free-for-all of cannabis legalization. You got to sort of understand a little bit that, governments aren't like that. So that we're gonna make it restrictive. We're gonna do it, we're going to make it restrictive, and then we're going to slowly open it over time. I mean, if you look at alcohol, it took alcohol 80 years after the prohibition of alcohol to allow micro distilleries of alcohol. It took 80 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be a little quicker than that.
Yeah. That's I think that we'll have to be expedited a little bit on that.
I think so. I think, and we'll see it, right? I mean,
yeah.
Once all the studies start rolling in, and it's like, hey, traffic accidents did go up. It's like all of a sudden you can have statistics on, this person's a weed smoker, and our statistics show that weed smokers have less car accidents than people that smoke alcohol, or right. You'll start having all the health benefits, and it's all gonna. I mean, I think it's like psychedelics in general are going to open up for like the next generation. Like I was from a generation where you didn't have anybody to tell you about mushrooms or acid. Some guy just sold you acid in the back of some room and said, "Take this," right? And had a psychedelic trip. Didn't have a guru or anything, or a teacher to teach you the ways.
Yep.
I think the kids of tomorrow, look, we have like ketamine psychotherapy clinics opening up for people with feeling a little down, going for a fucking hour ketamine trip. Like, what? I mean, I'll tell you this story about the first time I ever met someone on ketamine, and that person scared the crap out of me until not ever wanted to try it because he was straight down the K-hole.
Yeah. I don't understand the ketamine. I mean, we used it growing up, but to use it in a clinical setting, I can see the MDMA for sure and mushrooms, and I'm sure that there's clinical use for it. But when I heard ketamine was being used, I was like, really? Like, that's super interesting.
With just amazing results. PTSD.
I think that's incredible.
Incredible.
I wouldn't have guessed it as somebody who has partaken, but that I just
like micro dosing mushrooms. I mean, what an amazing thing. Anytime that I know I'm gonna have like an anxiety filled day, take like a 0.2 micro dose mushroom, anxiety's gone. Right? Like just anxiety's gone, and I have zero side effects, and I just feel great. Smoke a joint, I go to bed, I wake up, I feel great.
Yeah.
I mean, my goal after sort of cannabis here is I'm either going to get into making furniture with secret compartments, or I'm going to develop a old age psychedelic retirement home.
I'm totally into either of those two. I'll probably promote you to do both.
What? Oh, I mean, it's like if I'm old and I'm in a wheelchair, just dose me up and wheel me out to the lawn. I won't bother anybody, right? I mean,
oh man, I love it. Matt,
the story. We have a story, and it's a great story from the Vicks back in the early days when really most of the people that were coming to the Vicks were street people and things like that. I remember the street dealer once yelling at us because we had to open up a storefront cannabis place and we were taking all his business. But anyways, we had this. So one day, this old lady, she was in her 80s, and she comes like walking into the dispensary, and she's like, "I saw this program last night that said weed, it could be medicinal. Tell me, educate me." And we're like telling her, we're like, "Oh, you smoke?" She's like, I haven't smoked anything in my whole life. I'm not smoking nothing." We're like, "Oh, okay, cool. We got these tinctures and ointments and cookies and cookies. What do you mean cookies?" We're like, "Oh, these cannabis cookies. Just take like one bite and see how it goes. And if you want to maybe a little more, do it the next day. Right, next day, take 2 bites, but go low and slow." And she's like, "Okay, I'll take a pack of cookies." And we're like, "Oh, cool." And she like leaves, and we're like, "Holy fuck, 80-year-old grandma It's like it wasn't unheard. It was unheard of for us at the time. It was new. It was, these are like 20 years ago. And like a week later, Betty comes back. So Betty walks in, and Betty has a painting. And so she comes and sits down, and she tells us a story of, she's like, I ate a whole cookie. We're like, what? No, you were just supposed to take a bite. She's like, nope, I ate the whole cookie. And I pulled out my paints and I started painting. And we're like, that's fantastic. She's like, I haven't been able to paint for 15 years because the arthritis in my hands is so great that I haven't been able to paint. She goes, I ate that cookie, pulled those paints out, and she's like, I painted this for you guys. Right? We were all like, holy fuck. She's like, and I'll take another pack of cookies. Right? We're like, oh, that's great. So Betty goes, right? So we start seeing her on a regular basis. All of a sudden, this other old lady comes in the shop, and she just says, I want what you're giving Betty.
Yes.
Right? And we're like, wow, we're just giving her cookies. And she's like, what? That's it? Cookies? Because Betty won't tell anybody at the old age home that she lives in what she's doing, because she's scared, right? She doesn't want to tell people. I'm on weed, you get kicked out of the home or something. So we started selling her cookies, right? This old guy comes in. I want what you're giving Betty. Right? We're like, oh, we're giving her cookies, right? Next thing you know, there's like 5 or 6 of them, all from this old age home that are coming in for cookies, right? We're like, this is amazing.
Dude, that's so great.
For me, my go-to is joints. I'm just saying. Always has been, always will. So we get this call, and it's the manager to the old age home. I want to have a meeting. I want to know what's going on. We're like, oh fuck, right? This is it. This guy's gonna turn us in. This isn't gonna go well, right? This guy shows up and he sits down and he's like, what's going on here? Like, what? Like, tell me what's going on here. We're like, oh. He's like, what are you giving Betty? We're like, oh, we're just like selling her cookies. And he's just like, looks at us and he's like, cookies. That's it. We're like, wow, there's like weed in them, weed cookies. And he's like, well, that's all you're giving her. And all these other people, they're all just coming here and buying cookies. We're like, yeah, why? Like, they won't tell you? They're like, no, nobody will say anything. Right? And I'm like, well, like, what's the problem? And the guy's like, oh no, there's no problem. There's like, I'm here to figure out why these people are feeding themselves, dressing themselves, taking themselves to the washroom, having their own shower, taking their own shit, cleaning their room. He's like, my staff and my facility is so clean right now, and it's so well run. I just want to know what's going on. And you just told me that these people are eating cookies. That's it. Right? I mean, this guy literally walked out of the place going, cookies. He's like, keep selling them cookies. And it was just like one of these classic stories of, wow, like really, weed is doing all this for these people.
Yeah.
Just quality of life. At the end of the day, just quality of life.
Yeah.
And I mean, over the 15 years of working at the Vix, man, we just story after story. I remember I had this strain Ghost. It was like it was Afghani cross with something. I named it Ghost because the first time I smoked it, I was on my bicycle, and my bicycle, like, it felt like there was no bicycle. It was just me, like, floating down the road. I was so high, so I called it Ghost. And I was sitting there because I used to work there too, because I liked hearing everybody's stories. And this large lady comes in and sits down, and she's like, I'd like some more of that Ghost. And I'm like, that cool. And she's like, that strain works for me. And I'm like, oh, that's great. She's like, I haven't been able to get out of bed in a month. And I smoked some this morning, and I decided to come in here and get some more. I'm just like, it's just like in tears. You're like, oh my God, this story is amazing. And she walks away, and then you're like, many times I just sat on the rocks down by the ocean. We're just like, this is unbelievable. The like quality of life that these people get just from weed, right? Like, come from a place where I just wanted to grow weed to pay my rent, and now I'm sitting in a place, making these people feel better. And it's just such a simple thing. And I mean, when I was sitting in the courtroom waiting for the judge to make her decision, it was either guilty or innocent. And if I was guilty, that would have been a 14-year jail sentence that would have been imposed on me, which ironically would have been just up this year. I would have just been getting out of jail if I had lost that court case. So the amount of change that happened in that little span of time really started with just my journey of intention and how do I grow weed better.
That's really cool, man. That's a crazy story. So, I mean, being involved with the plant so much, maybe there's not just one, but like, what would you say would be your proudest moment in cannabis over the last decade? Like, would it be, a cup? Would it be an award? Would it be getting into the transitioning and seeing your product on the legal shelf? Like, what would be your proudest moment?
Hmm. I mean, so many. The court case, I mean, had such an impactful moment, and it was like on other people. I mean, really just the journey, the like personal journey into like sort of character and just being a good person, right? I mean, being in the cannabis industry, you have lots of opportunity to run into a lot of people that aren't good people.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe just in every facet of life, but I mean, the simplest of simple rules that I usually abide by is just find the good people, right? And focus on being a good person. At the end of the day, just be a good person. I always tease my mom. My mom she's quite Christian. I mean, I wouldn't maybe not as far as evangelical, but she's quite Christian. She loves her Jesus. And I always sort of tease her about, why do you have to be coerced into being a good person? Why can't you just be a good person? She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, I don't need someone to tell me that I'm going to go to hell if I'm not a good person. I'd be like, that's like, are you a good person if you're being a good person because you fear not being a good person? I don't know. That's another sort of deep philosophical sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's like, I guess that's the thing about traveling all over the world. Like, I've been to Morocco, I've been to Cuba, I've been all these countries, and at the end of the day, everybody just wants to you know be happy, provide for their family, live a nice stress-free life, and walk your path, do your journey. Be on your journey. And I don't know. I don't know. I'd be in this. How long will I be in the weed game for? It? I don't know. Maybe for 40 years. Maybe for 50 years. If we can make it work here, if I can make it work, we have the beginnings of the next generation that'll sort of want to take it over, right? I'm approaching 50 years old. Can I do it for another 20 years? Sure, of course. Show up every day growing weed. I probably will, no matter what. I mean, I have like a wall over here of ribbons, that one at the fair for potatoes and wheat and barley and oats and squash, and it's funny because we enter into the Cowichan Expo because they have a cannabis category in the Cowichan Expo now. Like 150 years running the Cowichan Expo, and I could put my weed up beside the old ladies in their quilts and the ladies in their pies and bread and stuff, and I'm there with my weed, and I've had a great experience, you know, getting to know the community, because before these ladies thought that cannabis people were evil criminals, right? And I've got to show them of hey, I'm this cannabis grower, and over the years I'm now coming for all your other awards. I've won for best pickles, I won for best salsa, I've won for, right? I have a friend, I want to make a cannabis quilt because I want to come after the quilt title. I'm like, coming for your quilt title, right? I tried to do the bread, but man, there's some good bread makers in the world, and my little peasant loaf just got destroyed. I've won chocolate chip cookies, third place last 2 years. I mean, just living life, right? Living life.
Damn, third place chocolate chip cookie?
Third place.
Is all the grannies?
My grandma's recipe that she taught me, and I make it from scratch, like right off not even a recipe. I just have it to memorize.
That's incredible. I think that, you know, it's really cool to see somebody like you pushing the craft movement forward on so many different levels. I think that you teaming up with Kirk, who I hope to have on the show as well to tell his story.
Yeah, great story.
You know, is really a testament to what has to happen, where there has to be a bridge between different individuals with different strength, but those individuals need to align with the plant. And like, I've never met Kirk, but I've watched him, as you know, as much as I can through social media and through, you know, the court cases and the work he's done. And you know, that guy walks his fucking talk.
Oh yeah, I mean, so, we clicked because after the trial, every day we would go back to the Vicks, and we'd go to the back room in the Vicks, and we'd start smoking weed, and there'd be 15 people in there smoking weed, and then all of a sudden it was just Kirk and I smoking weed, and everyone else was tapped out, and we just kept smoking weed, and we just kept smoking weed, and we just smoked so much weed that we just became friends, right? And I mean, the rest is history off of that.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, getting those connections together and finding, you know, the 2 or 3 people together who have different strengths, and then moving forward, I think is really the key to success. Just finding those right partners. But super stoked to see what you guys are doing. What's the plan for the genetics you're cultivating? Are you cultivating one cultivar, or are you cultivating a few right now, or
I have one right now. Right now. Well, so we ended up getting HLV a while back, which pretty much decimated our library, decimated everything we had, to the point where I just said fuck it, and I chopped everything down and started from seed again. So we're just in the process of finding some good new phenos. So the one we're just harvesting today, called French Fire Barb, total banger, super frosty. Most of my shots on Instagram lately are the French Fire Barb, just because that's what we're working on. I have some chemo rom that's really nice that we're looking at right now. I also have some grapefruit. So we had two phenos of grapefruit. One was more like the old sweet pink grapefruit, and we had this other purple grapefruit. We ended up crossing those 2 together. So we're like pheno hunting those, looking for just fucking fire grapefruit taste. Some other things, we're got a Where's My Bike cross with a Romulan, which is like an Amnesia Haze cross with a Romulan. There's a really interesting one in there that's a sort of quicker flowering, but sort of holds on to that sort of Amnesia smell to it. So it's drying right now, so we haven't sort of sampled it yet.
We're seeing like a big resurgence of like the equatorial Cuban black PIF, both on the west and east coast of the U.S. And I know we've kind of always had that Seedsman Haze tip here in Canada, but I think that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see that influence really start coming up. And you see a lot of breeders who are trying to be original and mix it up and reinvigorate that gene pool, bringing in those equatorials. So I think that those flavor profiles are more energizing are going to come more into vogue over the next few years. And I think that those profiles are like polarizing, where you either love them or hate them.
Sure.
And you're either for them or against them.
It's getting that experience from that sort of haze into a sort of quicker flowering plant, I think, is really where the homework.
Do you feel as though you're able to capture all the magic of something that takes 14 plus weeks and work? Like, do you feel
sure.
as a leader?
Is it possible? Sure, why not? If you look through enough combinations, I mean, you'll find the one you're looking for.
Yeah,
takes a lot of combinations, right? I mean, for me, the first time I saw Barbara Bud in a field in Morocco with like 100,000 plus plants changed the game for me, right? Because I could walk through the field and actually do the math, and and it's like, wow, right? That's why for me, a lot of the guys in Spain are unmatched in their ability to pheno select, because they could go over to Morocco 10,000 plants at a time and look for the combinations, right? This plant holds 60% of what I'm looking for. It only holds 10% of what I'm looking for, right? You can sort of find projects or speed or know where your project is. I mean, doing that many selections, you get to see. I mean, for us, it was like the short, squat Afghani that could be found within the Barbara Bud. I mean, before Morocco, I never knew it was there.
Mm-hmm.
Just never saw it. It's like, wow, look at that crappy little bush.
How big a population did you determine you had to replicate to be able to find that expression? Like, was it 40? Was it 80?
I try to start with 100.
Yeah.
And then whittle it down. And usually by the time I'm because for me, I like structure, right? If I find a plant that's like really weak in structure and it has that super frosty sort of dank bud to it, I mean, what are you're gonna put that in the production room? You can't put it in the production room. Some people try, but it's like, I'm like, no, it's like, because I'm the grower, right? So I want to grow something that I enjoy growing. It looks nice. It finishes, the whole thing finishes nice. The top's not busting out and white pistils and the whole plant's finished. And you're like, what the fuck? This thing's not finishing. And right? It's got to have the total package. It has to be that sort of qualified as the sort of gem of gems, right? It has to click in every single mark, and there's nothing worse than having it click in every mark, and then you puff it, and you're like, nah. You're like,
how often do you make a selection outside and bring it inside and are disappointed?
I have the quick barbs that I've grown them inside, and I'm like, nah. But outside, they're like phenomenal.
Yeah. But do you find, like, typically in the past with pheno hunting, are you doing that primarily outside and then bringing those selections inside to see how they express it?
But with the quick project, I'm actually doing the opposite, because I can run flowering cycles indoors, set the light cycle at 1410,
yeah,
and pick which plants are triggering flower wise under there, do my selection, and I could take those plants all the way through to the point where I do shake tests on them to figure out which ones are dumpers. Last time, I have 3 quick barb phenos right now, and I think I started with like 200 plants, and it whittled down to 3 at the end, and now we're doing a couple outdoor seasons just to sort of figure out which one's the best. because you're right. Like if I whittled it just down to one, and maybe it looked great indoors, I took it outside and be like, it's not that great. Or you take the three outside, and the one that does the best indoors doesn't do the best outdoors. And so it's better to have a wide variety to sort of do your outdoor tests with.
There seems to be kind of two schools of thought with breeders these days as far as their males go. Are you keeping one male and using one male in your breeding, or are you using multiple males when you're doing your crossing?
I mean, that you're talking like an open pollination. I mean, you're gonna do an open pollination, you'd sort of do it once at the beginning.
Not necessarily an open pollination, but like keeping more than one male and using that to pollinate the females. Like, is that something that you've done often, or do you typically...
No, I haven't done that.
Okay. So, what was my question? I wanted to ask about your males. So are you keeping your males alive typically in your breeding projects, or are you reviving them from seed stock and picking new ones each time?
So most of our projects were fem projects. So then I was creating the fems off the females.
Yeah.
But like right now, I have in the back room, because we grew out some of the Afghani seeds that I have. So I have 5 Afghani males in the back right now. I'm probably going to do a project once I figure out which ones. I mean, it's always difficult of, how do you pick, what are your characteristics of picking a good male?
And what's gonna pass? Like, I mean, I've got a friend, T. Beasel, who his company's Little Lake Valley, and he believes that males pass structure and resin, and every male passes structure and resin. So you just look for the best structure and resin in the males. And then I've talked to a lot of people who would completely disagree with that. So you've got to kind of pick your ground and stand on it.
Bud structure in there a little bit, sort of how the male stack up and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting to see how everybody does it a little bit differently and approaches it in a different way. So it's really cool to kind of find out.
So the last 10 years, mostly just feminized seed. It was really interesting last year to Spanibus, the fact that I have 4 or 5 that I have the regular side of, and the people in Barcelona, the regular seed sales are on the rise because the people are getting tired of the Hermes that are showing up in the fem seeds, so they're going back to regular seeds. I know in America they've been sort of regular seed dominant for a long time and reluctant to go fem. And I think there's going to be a real resurgence of regular seed.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where the genetic and seed game goes over the next 5 years, because we're starting
cut and paste, man.
Yeah,
Technology will be amazing.
But I think that there's a lot of money coming into the space on the corporate side of things that is going to be able to move faster than
of course
a lot of us have previously been able to. And so it's going to be interesting to see how we're able to sort of carve out our space. And what I think it's going to be is that the biggest biomass and the most sort of one-dimensional high note flavors that can be produced in less than optimal cultivation conditions will be relegated to those, breeding laboratories. And then the very nuanced, more delicate, maybe less yielding, but better tasting cultivars are going to remain in possession of the breeders that are that are currently and have been involved in the game for a long time. So, I mean, that's just my opinion.
And then you have the sort of home growers sort of disappear because of the sort of culture that we came from of, you know, the extra mortgage payment room in the basement of most people's houses, and that sort of connection, and people stop growing it, and you're going to see. I've sort of lost my train of thought there.
I think we're talking about you know, the disconnection that can happen with the commodification and corporatization of weed.
Yeah. So you'll have people that aren't growing anymore. The genetics aren't being shared, and the big guys, and you'll just be able to go to the store and get your Labatt Blue or your Molson Canadian, and the right, people aren't buying the seeds, so the seed banks, old companies close down, and they're harder to get. And I can see that. I mean, especially if you talk a generation or 2 generations in the future.
Yeah,
it's like how many people. You know, how many people grow their own wheat to make their own flour? Not too many. Yeah. I do, but I have like 4 pails of wheat seed in my kitchen, depending on what we're making, and I mill my own wheat to make my own flour anytime that I need some flour. Now, if the shit hits the fan, and if I get low on my wheat seeds, I just grow more wheat. And it's because I just use it in the back field here. So this year I grew my own oats because we're like, we eat our own oatmeal, so let's grow our own oats. And then we figured out how to do rolled oats. Now it's like the oatmeal that you eat, you can close your eyes and you can take it all the way back to the soil while you're eating it, right? And it's like,
that's pretty cool.
Right? It's like grow your own food and grow, you know, like my neighbor, I trade weed plants with my neighbor for chickens and goats and pigs, and it's like community. It's like when you go to, that's what I like about Europe so much, because it's like, you know, you go over the mountain and down into the valley, and they have the guy that's the meat guy, and you have the dairy guy and the cheese guy and the bread person, and then you go up over the next valley, and it's just a different guy that makes the bread, and it's a different guy that makes the cheese, and right, I have a lady just around the corner here that I've discovered, and that she makes cheese curds that will rival any cheese curd out of Montreal.
Damn.
Right? So now at Sunday morning, I can go over to her place and, you know, buy a pack of dynamite cheese. And it's just small farmer, right? That's what I love about the island here, because it's like you have all these kooky people that have their passion in what they do, and it's like awesome.
Oh man, the island is a special place, that's for sure.
You know, I was just up at Whistler last weekend, just being up on the mountains. It was special. You know, go to Tofino, go surfing. Killer whale goes by.
Oh man.
Orca, I should say. Orca goes by.
Man, it's good times. Well, Matt, I appreciate you coming on, man. Where's the best place for people to reach you? Like if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about your brand, or, you know, what's going on in your life.
Catch me on Instagram at Great Gardener or Great Gardener Farms, both those accounts. The Great Gardener Farms is more the Canadian, what we're doing in the Canadian side, and Great Gardener is more my daily life and things like that.
That's awesome.
Catch me on Twitter. I think at Great Gardener _. You catch me on the Social Club at Great Gardener. Facebook under Matt Barron. That's more. I probably won't accept your friendship on Facebook, so don't go there. Keep it more family and friends than anything.
That's dope.
I don't go to Facebook too much anymore anyway. Mostly on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram 90% of the time. Or you can go to www.greatgardenerfarms.com. You can go to houseofthegreatgardener.com. They're both those websites you can check out for all the genetics that we have and the things that we're working on. And you going to Barcelona? You going to be at Spanibus this year?
It's gonna be my first Spanibus, man.
Nice. Good times. Good times.
No, I'm super excited. So I'll definitely catch you there. And thank you again for taking the time. I had such a good time chopping it up with you and hearing your story. I think it's a story that a lot more people need to know. So hopefully it gets out there and love to have you back on. But definitely stoked to get Kirk on as well. And
totally, come on up next time you're here. Come ride our ramp grow with the half pipe in the grow room.
Bro, I watched you build that thing. I don't skateboard, but I'll definitely chill and check it out.
Well, you can be. We have a video selection of people that drop in for the first time.
No, I will not be on that video selection. I tell you that.
You can sign your skin smear on the ramp. Yeah. I dropped in on this day.
Oh man, awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time.
All right, peace, guys. Yeah,
thanks, everybody. Moth, New York, January tickets on sale. Check it out. Cheers, everybody.